Hello and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering EDH deck tech idea. If you enjoy having a dice right next to your commander counting a discount, then stay tuned because today we are talking about Sami, Wildcat Captain. But before we jump into today's video, I want to make a shout out for Mythatom. Check out their high quality Magic the Gathering and other fantasy products via the link in the notes below and use my discount code LATSEL for 10% off your order. It is a 6 mana 4/4 with double strike and vigilance and a very powerful ability because spells you cast have affinity for artifacts. This means that the spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact that you have on the battlefield. It doesn't matter if we are talking about non-tokens or tokens, all that matters is that it is an artifact. As you might have already seen a few lists online, there are a bunch of decks that run this commander as a Voltron commander that plays a bunch of artifacts to simply go through his deck and pump up Sami even more. But I have built this deck a little bit different. We are going for an X-spell approach, which we want to overwhelm our opponents with. First up, we want to ramp in the early game because our commander costs 6 mana. In addition to that, a bunch of our ramp artifacts also synergize with Sami's ability, which is why this is the perfect early game approach. We play cards like Goldmere, which taps for a white mana, but is also an artifact to also discount spells later on even more. We go with Ironmere, we go with Ornithopter of Paradise, we go with Palladiummere, and we also play a bunch of mana rocks that are commonly played in Boros colors like Burrow Signal, Talisman of Conviction, and so on and so on. Very important for this deck is that we are also playing the artifact lands like Ancient Den, Great Furnace, and Darksteel Citadel. Aside from playing mana rocks, we can also combine Cardadvantage spells with accelerating our game plan, which is why we play Big Score. We can discard a card to draw 2 cards and create 2 treasure tokens. Just as with Unexpected Windfall, a less powerful version is also Seize the Spoils. A perfect turn 1 play can be Strike It Rich. And I have also added Pirate's Pillage to this deck. Even though it is a sorcery speed spell, it still fits perfectly into our game plan. Another ramp artifact that you know I love is Collector's Vault. Itself already helps with Sami's ability later on, and we can loot through our deck and along the way create even more treasure tokens. This is most likely how our whole early game is going to look like. As our commander is crucial for our game plan, we also play a bunch of protection spells which we always have to be ready to use. Starting off with Lightning Greaves. As soon as this one is equipped to Sami, he will most likely be protected from single target removal. Furthermore, itself is also an artifact, so we can discount other spells with this one. We want to flash in Mithril Coat if our opponents want to destroy Sami, and in the best cases it will be a free spell simply because it costs 3 generic mana, and at the point where we have Sami on the battlefield, we should have enough artifacts to discount this one to 0, which makes it a staple in this deck. When it comes to protection spells, I always have to highlight Restoration Magic. It is a great spell for single target protection because it cares about permanence, and later on we can also pay a little bit more mana into it to protect our whole board, which will be relevant because we are going to win by a go wide approach. In addition to that, we also play Dawn's Truce, a great protection spell if we want to give something or ourselves hexproof, and if we need to, we can gift an opponent a card to also make our whole board indestructible. If our opponent wants to play an exile removal like Farewell for example, we want to give it back to our opponent's hand with Reprieve. This might only delay what is about to happen, but it might give us enough time to kick that player out. And when it comes to single target protection, we also play Rebuff the Wicked, a counter spell in white, which cares about a single target of us. Something that I personally find really hard in Boros colors is Cardadvantage. As you have seen early on, we play cards like Big Score, Unexpected Windfall, Seize the Spoils, which are great cards, but here are a few that are worth playing. Starting off with Ignite the Future, a great impulse spell that lets us play those spells that we have exiled until the end of our next turn, which I personally think is a must play for impulse spells. And even better, we can flashback it from our graveyard, sadly for a huge amount, but we can discount that due to our commander, and those spells that we exile when we cast a spell from our graveyard we can play for free. Which makes it a perfect fit in this deck because our commander will discount all of our spells. Another great spell that we want to play along is Inspired Tinkering. Another very expensive impulse spell, but we are fine with that because if we draw it or if we play it, if we have already our commander on the battlefield, it will cost way less, give us a huge card advantage, and it will also create treasure tokens which we can either use or simply keep around to have even more discount for our commander. One of the best impulse spells in my opinion is Zenith Festival. It is an X-impulse spell that lets us play those cards until the end of our next turn, and we can also harmonize it from our graveyard, which is kinda like Flashback if you know what I'm saying. And we can tap a creature in addition to that, which will be our commander, simply because we don't care about attacking with our commander, so this is already +4 for free. And with that you can also calculate your whole discount into it, which can turn this one into a huge impulse spell. And now we are going to prepare ourselves to win the game. As I have said earlier, we have a go wide approach to win the game because a bunch of X spells create tokens, which is why we want to profit from them entering the battlefield, which is why we play cards like Impact Tremors. In addition to that, we also want to Anthem them up, which is why we play War Leader's Call, a great combination out of an Anthem enchantment and also pinging our opponents down. The only other creature that we are playing in this deck is Weft Stalker Ardent. It also came with Edge of Eternities and it pings our opponents as soon as a creature or an artifact enters the battlefield under our control. And guess what? We got a bunch of that. Another enchantment that we can luckily flash in and which is about to come soon with the Avatar set is Fated Firepower. It enters with a certain amount of counters on it depending on how much we have paid into the X. Due to the fact that we are talking about an X spell, this also gets discounted by our commander. Which means that even though if we have a huge army of 1/1s on the battlefield, which our opponents will probably ignore, we can flash this one in before we get into our next turn to get a huge power boost as soon as our sources connect with something that our opponents control. And now let's talk about the cards that will win us the game in this deck. We play Finale of Glory, probably one of the most powerful X spells out there in White, because if we have paid enough into the X, we will create angels instead of soldiers. If we want to have a really impactful turn immediately, we play 4th Eolingus. It creates haste creatures that also have trample, and as soon as one of those creatures connect with our opponents, we will become the monarch, which also creates Cardadvantage while we are also progressing with our way to win. A card from the Final Fantasy precons is Champions from Beyond. This powerful X spell enchantment will create a bunch of tokens for us, and from then on create a bunch of Cardadvantage and also an overrun effect, depending on with how many creatures we are attacking. If we attack with enough creatures, they all will get +4/+4, which is basically a Beastmaster Ascension in White. Luckily, a bunch of X spells are also at instant speed, which is why we play White Sun's Zenith. This instant speed X spell creates tokens equal to the amount that we have paid into it, and then it shuffles itself back into our library, which means that we can re-hit it with our impulse spells. Another really powerful X spell that we want to foretell early on is Starnheim Unleashed, because as soon as we did that, we can later on pay a bunch into the X to create even more angel tokens. As our opponents see how wide we are already going, they will most likely try to wipe the board, which is why we play Grand Crescendo. It creates even more tokens, and after that all of our creatures get indestructible. Either we will ping our opponents down with all of those Impact Tremors effects that we already have committed to the battlefield before firing off one of our powerful X spells, or we will use our Anthem enchantments like Champions from Beyond or War Leader's Call or Fated Firepower to simply beat our opponents down. And now let's talk about cards that will win you even more games. As you have already seen, we create a bunch of tokens. This is why we play Kafar's Crusade in this deck. Another enchantment that puts +1/+1 counters on all of our creatures as soon as a creature enters the battlefield. Which means that if we have this one on the battlefield, we can flash in cards like White Sun's Zenith and surprise our opponents out of nowhere with a huge army. Another card that shines in this deck is Brass's Bounty. At first it looks like a really expensive sorcery spell, but we can discount the spell with our commander to create even more discount and also treasures that we can use afterwards. For the most impactful discount, we play Mycosynth Lattice, which turns everything into artifacts. Which means that as soon as this one is on the battlefield, we will have a huge discount from our commander. Not only do we have powerful X spells that create tokens, but we also play cards like Crackle with Power. In combination with Mycosynth Lattice, this should be enough to ping our opponents down. If it won't be enough, we can first cast Storm King's Thunder, which will either copy our Crackle with Power or a powerful token creation X spell. And if we are up against a bunch of blue players, we play Jaya's Immolating Inferno. Alright guys, guys, these were a few cards that I would play in Sami, Wildcat Captain. Make sure to check out my full deck list in the notes below. Let me know which cards you would add to the deck, which legendary creature I shall feature next, and then I would say see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.